Okay, so I've been in Gometra nearly a decade now. I do come from almost 30 years of archaeology. Like I said, I was used to being developer-funded archaeology, then got into community. I was seconded into community archaeology in the 90s, and I never really looked back after that. Moved to Gometra 10 years ago, very remote island. There's only 4 of us living there. It's a long way from a road. And after the clearances in the 1850s, really quite a deserted island. Not really much had happened to the islands since the middle of the 19th century. This is kind of my life, going backwards and forwards on a quad bike across tracks. And like it's been said, I think I've done about 30,000 miles over 10 years, just driving backwards and forwards in the quad bike. So you get to see the landscape in all its different shapes, its colors and its lights. And I think it took 3 years before things began to really pop out of the bracken. About 4 or 5 years ago, set up a group called Dukas Ulva, who were a colleague of mine, Amiria Samlin, who probably knows just about anything there is to know about the people of Ulva. We set up a group together, which was a kind of research group of all people who had an active research interest in Ulva. And we've got about 25 members now. And over the last couple of years, ACFA obviously have been on the island 3 times now surveying. But we have Edinburgh University as well, and they have a long interest in Ulva. And St Andrews is now helping us with dendrochronology and other things like that. So Ulva basically is a kind of a deserted landscape. Mostly nowadays, when you walk across it, you'll see the black houses that were deserted during the clearance, which was one of the harshest clearances we have on the west coast, akin to further north of the Duke of Sutherland clearances. So a lot of upstanding ruins. And this is a kind of the map of Ulva and Gometra. I am not used to talking about the islands to people who may not actually know where Ulva and Gometra is specifically, because usually I'm doing this to quite local people. So Ulva is the big island, which I have to cross to get to the little wee island of Gometra. So this is where I live, the red dot on the left-hand side. And my daily commute is to the red dot on the right-hand side. And this is my route across the islands, kind of almost nearly every day, even Christmas Day sometimes, depending. And this is what I'm heading to, Ulva Hostel, which is a nice advert for Ulva Hostel. We have space, should anyone want to come. It's very comfortable. And sometimes I carry people, and I think 1 or 2 people might recognize the folk on the back of my quad bike, dragging them all the way out to Gometra in April to do some surveying and some blissful weather. And like I said, I get to see the whole island in all its colors, its seasons, and and obviously you get this view. So this is a view of Gometra with the Treshnish Isles beyond. And if you can actually see right in the distance is Tiree and Heinisch, which obviously ACFA have surveyed across. So we're within a kind of 10 miles of Tiree. We can certainly see it from the west coast of Gometra. So just to give it a kind of wider scope, because again, that's a kind of the detailed of the islands. So obviously we're talking about the Isle of Mull, the west coast of the Isle of Mull. We've got Tiree, we've got Cole, we've got the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, which obviously has its own wonderful archaeology, Swaddle Bay and the Viking boat burial. And we've got Iona, which probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but obviously a great center of monastic life. And in the middle is Ulva and Gometra. And even to the day, the sea route past the islands is a major sea route for big ships coming up and down the coast. And the inner route between Tyree and Cole and Mull is a sheltered route for smaller vessels. And I think this is what we kind of bear in mind for this whole talk, is how Ulva and Gometra sit out into this waterways, which I think has been used for thousands of years, probably as from the late Paleolithic, basically from our last ice age, all the way through to almost to the present day. This was a natural corridor for boats, particularly small boats, moving up and down the coast. So going back, that's our map again. This is care of Emiria, who's had this done for us. It's a lovely map. So Ulva itself has had one or two bits of archaeology done, most significant being Edinburgh University's since the mid-80s. This is Professor Clive Bonsal's excavation at Ulva Cave, otherwise known as Livingston's Cave. Can get a bit confusing. It's known as Ulva Cave in the academic literature, Livingston's Cave in the local guides. So they've been digging there. This is a Mesolithic site of quite huge significance. It's got shell midden in it, and it was a temporary camp. They were foraging for limpets, periwinkles, crab, that kind of thing. But it's not a permanent Mesolithic settlement as such. That's something that Edinburgh is still trying to find. But that's been going on and off for about 30 years. So we're just showing here a picture of Edinburgh University excavating what I think is an Iron Age settlement, which is about 100 yards from where I'm sitting, which I found purely by accident last year in quite appalling conditions. I think this was the only time the sun shone. It was the time when it was really raining. So we don't know yet I still think it's an Iron Age farmstead, but that's it's going to need much more investigation. Other surveys, which there are limited ones because it's such a remote island, not much has been done. Usually these surveys have been done in advance of agricultural changes. So this one has been done back in the early noughties by West Coast Archaeology in advance of tree planting. And again, typical walkover survey, they are recording the upstanding historic environment, built historic environment. So the black houses, the things they can see on the surface, the briars, the stackyards, and the things like that. What we do have is, this is somebody who was quite significant within the historic, group, was Meg Douglas, who did her own study of not just Ulva, but Mull in general, but she has got Ulva in here. And she did, again, a kind of walkover survey. She walked around the island. Everyone's very keen to get back to get the ferry off because no one wants to be stranded on Ulva. So this is all done at a pace. But she went around the island herself and she recorded a lot of things, including her focus really was on corn drying kilns, but she did record other things. Two things sprang out of this piece of work. This is done in the 1990s, but two things did spring out to me many years, which was the references to stone circles, but we'll come back to that. The only other kind of excavation as such has been done in Ulva is actually done on a school trip in 1962. So this is the school's Hebridean Society, which was a kind of a forerunner of the Outward Bound group, and very significant at that time. They did a lot of work. They were quite applauded for their work. Their first expedition was to Gometra in 1962. Their steam train broke down at Crewe and had to be rescued. They were taken by trawler from Oban up the Sound of Mull, and all got seasick halfway up, and half got off and had to walk across Mull because they were too seasick. And because it was August and they were camping, storm came in and destroyed all their tents. So very typical West Coast experience. But they did survey some of the significant townships in Ulva, but they excavated this feature, which is an islet done off the west coast of Ulva. And we know very little about the excavation itself. The actual excavation report doesn't seem to exist. All we've got is their diaries, but we do have their excavation plan, and we do have some suggestion that they found some ironwork, but that's really all we have. We'll come back to that. And then the only other person, but maybe probably one of the most important people in the archaeology of Mull and study of, is Ursula Betts, a very flamboyant character who was a guerrilla fighter in the Far East during the Second World War, fighting the Japanese. Then after the war married and came to Mull, was very significant in Mull archaeology, set up the Mull Historical Society. She visits Gometra in 1958 because the island had recently been bought by the Howards. And she gives a good description of what she saw, and some of which no longer exists. But she seems to have had some insights that are quite interesting, because it is interesting to think how she got to those conclusions, because she might have been right, but we don't know why she's right. The area we're actually going to look, so this map here, basically what I've been doing, when the island came into community ownership, I was kind of conscious that no real overall study of the archaeology and the heritage had ever been done of Ulva. It all was very piecemeal in very different databases, and I was trying to pull it together in advance of changes that were going to naturally happen on the island because it's now a community-owned island. The area we're going to look at, however, because it's too much to do in one talk, would be here hours, is this particular area. So this is the sound between Ulva and Gometra, called Ambrew. So that's interesting. It's a Norse name, the bridge. And of course, Ulva is a Norse name and Gometra is a Norse name. So that gives some idea where I'm going with this. But this is the area that seems to have the highest concentration of archaeology, a quite amazing amount of archaeology within this area, most of it unrecorded. So this is what it looks like. It's a tidal sound. It's got a causeway. The one in the picture is the old causeway. It's got a channel, there's man-made channel that's been built through it, which is interesting in itself. And on both sides, you've got this expanse of archaeology that comes from all ages. So we're talking from the Mesolithic all the way through to the medieval, into the period of the townships. So most of which is unrecorded. So that's what we'll kind of concentrate on. So there is the known, the things that we already know existed, they are on the databases. The obvious one is this Dunban, this thing that was excavated by this group in 1962, the school trip. So this is them. The guy on the right is the Bishop of Norwich. He was one of the guys who set the group up. This is what it looks like. This is Dunban. It's got this causeway that goes out to it. It's got this beautiful set of steps to go up it. It's got a rock cut well on top of it. And they did the survey of it, which shows this structure on top, which is rectangular. And they've also got a harbour. I think they freely admitted in the next year that some of this was a bit pie in the sky stuff, and I think the harbour is just a figment of everyone's imagination, and I absolutely agree. But they certainly found this rectangular structure. Now, for the purpose of this talk, the thing to bear in mind on this structure is that, although you can't really see that, one end of the structure is, which is rectangular, is what I call apsidal, it's curved, and the other end is straight. But the most important thing on this one, just to bear in mind, is the doors are opposing, but at the end of the structure. Whereas the black houses all have their doors on these islands in the middle, because you have the buyer one side and living the other side. So this is interesting, because this will occur again and again, is the doors are at the end of the structure. This is what it looks like from aerial shot. And again, if you guys' eyes in sight, you can actually see this rectangular structure on top. I think the reason why it's so prominent is because it's been excavated. I think they chased the walls. I think we've kind of worked that out. The causeway is semi-natural. It's not all artificial. It was kind of existent, and they've kind of just used it and extended it. And this whole area, the shoreline is all full of foreshore features, quays, boat pull-ins, noosts, and kelp catchers. It shows an area that's been well used by people who knew how to use a boat. And also the land is, as you can see, it's covered in, and I do not call these things run rig at all, because I have this thing about them. This agricultural ridges, it's showing a huge amount of agriculture going on around this area. So going back to the map again, we're going to go to the other end of the sound where we've got another one. So this one is at the southern end, guarding this. It's not really a harbor. I'd call it a safe anchorage. This anchorage is very popular even today with pleasure boats. You get quite large pleasure boats mooring in here in the summertime. It's a very popular sheltered little place as long as the wind's not blowing from the south. And that gives some idea that this thing is probably been known about and used for thousands of years, because that's exactly what it is, the safe harbor. So down the other end, we've got this other dun, which is unlike the man. It's not actually in the sea. This one's on the foreshore between the low and the high mark. It's Tynaduin. And it's, again, I got someone who with a drone to drone it for me. It's an interesting feature. It's got features at the bottom, which look a little hut-likes, sheilings, maybe. I don't think they are. They could possibly be kelp workers' huts. But the actual feature itself is interesting because it's the main feature inside it, which we go a bit closer. There's this structure inside it, which is rectangular. But the thing that surrounds it is actually earlier. It's actually, I think, an Atlantic roundhouse. So this thing that's been put inside it, Ordnance Survey did come here in 1972. They saw the same thing. Their opinion was exactly the same, that someone has plonked a rectangular structure inside this other thing. We know kind of that because in this image, which is my attempt at a 3D scan of it, you've got this blocked up entrance. So when this rectangular structure is put in it, they block up the existing entrance, which is a really weird place to put the entrance in the first place anyway, and they make another entrance. I think this is a gallery done, and I think Ordnance Survey thought it was as well. It's a gallery done, so it's a form of Atlantic roundhouse. Again, quite interesting, because we go to this picture, is that the feature that's been plonked inside this Atlantic roundhouse, this gallery done, does resemble what's on Dunman. So remember that structure with the opposing doorways and everything else. So it's something similar going on. Down the bottom, which took me 7 years to discover, is this other feature. You can actually tell the wall makes a little kink at that point, which is one of the game's way. This turned out to be a quite large hut circle. And when I found it, this is one of these things, I can walk past these things or drive past these things thousands of times, and you just have to catch them in the right light, and suddenly you realize you've been driving past a hot circle for 1 million years. When I spoke to the owner of the island about this, and he said, "Oh, I knew it was there." He said, "But I just didn't know what it was." I said, "How many other things do you kind of know is there, but you don't know what they are?" But I 3D scan this and it comes out more. You can actually see this is a wireframe of the 3D scan. You can actually see it's a quite nice hut circle. This one actually has got a doorstep. It is slightly sunken. I think ACFA, when they came in April, have surveyed this. So this is now waiting for the report to come out. But it's got a lovely porch, which is what you can see on the kind of coming off of the angle on the right-hand side, just going up from the structure. It's got this porch or snout coming out of it, which is very similar to what Martin Wildgoose and Anna Welty found when they did their surveys of roundhouses and hut circles further up the coast. These roundhouses which have got a porch in them. So age-wise, no idea. When ACFA came in April, I think they've discovered more features within this landscape. So I suspect the dun is probably Iron Age, just because of the massive walls. But is this Iron Age? If you're asking me, I would say it's more Bronze Agey, but I could happily put Iron Age as well. Don't know. So going back to the map, so we've got these two duns sitting either side. Kind of one, you could almost say they're protecting the anchorages, ends, maybe. And then the other known feature is we've got the township. So we've got this township, Clacknagallen. It's on the map as Clackgallen, which is wrong. This is Ordnance Survey, not really. This was a bit far out for Ordnance Survey. Interestingly, when the school group in 1962 were excavating, they were using the map from 1890, which in the area where they were trying to dig, it was just kind of blank. There was nothing in it. So Ordnance Survey kind of gave up at this point. So Ordnance Survey got it in the wrong place. It should be up there. This is actually the township of Eostre. And Eostre is quite important because if anybody's ever coming back to Ulva, and they get a lot of people coming back, ancestors of the families who are cleared, quite a lot of them are MacDonalds. And if they're MacDonalds, they will come from this place. Nearly 90% of the people who are coming back to Ulva come from this township of Eostre, which is mad because there's only 4 houses. So I don't understand how that works. But this is, I've kind of changed the rotation of this. So the right end should be north, the south end, the left end is south. And you have these houses. This is perhaps one of the main areas of settlement on the west coast of Ulva, very strongly MacDonald's. Again, I have a sneaky suspicion that there is a good reason for this, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So back to the map again. You're going to see a lot of these maps just because, just try to give everyone an idea of the spatial positioning of everything. So the next one is up the top there, the top right, you've got Ballygorton. And Ballygorton is important because it's one of the cadet branches. Ulva is a Macquarie island, and Ballygorton is one of the cadet branches' main base. So it is quite an established township, quite extensive ruins left over from the clearances. And then we're going to go and pop across the other side onto Gometra this time. And this one is another township. So this is Ardskipnish. And this is what it looks like from an aerial. So a lot of these buildings are quite young. They're probably turn of the 19th century. Some of them are even younger than that because in the 1980s, some of them were reused for farming by the Howards. So some of them look younger than others. What's interesting, however, is this feature in the middle, which I've put a circle on because us archaeologists are attracted by circular features, and this is a circular feature. There's a reason why making a point of this is because we have 3 features in Ulva that could possibly be things that are not just of the townships. The townships have been built around them, i.e. they were pre-existing the townships, and they might have been focal points. This is what it looks like. It's a strange feature. The owner of Gometra thought it was a horse gang. It's not a horse gang. It is a platformed feature. It could well be a stackyard, but it's got what I call cardinal stones and entrances and a cairn in the middle. It's a bit of an odd one, but there is if on its own I would have dispelled it, put it aside as a stackyard or something like that. But because there are other features that we'll come to in a second, there might just be a question about it. So going back to the map, we have another township. This is Balachoich, and this is, I go past every day. This is about from my house all the way on to Ulva. So this white building is Jane Ann's, who was the last native of Gometra, who left in the 1980s. Gometra was not cleared like Ulva was. We actually don't know what happened to the population of Gometra, really. There were people there at least in the 1950s, but we don't quite know what happened during that clearance period because the documents aren't really clear. But it doesn't have the same history of clearance that Ulva has. And these people are enjoying themselves outside, having a glass of wine in some amazing weather for surveying, and thoroughly enjoying ourselves. So back to the map. We've got the graveyard on Gometra, which again is one of two on the islands. There's one on Ulva, both in quite remote locations. And they're very, very suggestive of an Irish monastic influence, maybe also because the one on Ulva has got the name that suggests it was the son of St. Columba. Maybe we're looking at a 7th century graveyard. It certainly was. Both graveyards were selected for possible examination for early Christian sites. The only trouble being they're so remote that you can't get anybody out there to go and have a look at them because they are just to conduct archaeology here is really quite challenging for nearly all units. So that's the kind of known. That's all that's really known. Gometra has got less known than Ulva, just because it's remoter. So these are all from the CanMore databases and as was then. And now we go into what we could be adding to the map. So the red dots are what we could be adding. So the first one is what actually set me on the whole story of, well, set me on the path to doing what I'm doing. So we go back to Meg Douglas's work, which is this 1990s survey, which was Lost Townships, Silent Voices. In that, she talks about a stone circle. Now, again, Meg was walking around the island very quickly, and she saw this feature right out on the western side of Ulva, and she was high up. She didn't have time to go down and see it. So she just gave a vague indication of where it was. And she says it's a stone circle. And she says it's not a stackyard. But she didn't have time to go and see it. So she kind of mentions it. She gives a vague location for it. And I spent 2 years trying to find it because that's how long it took to find this thing. So that's where it is. And that's the aerial photography. And I will just put a red thing over it. That's what it is. So again, it's a stone circle. Now, Mull doesn't do stone circles. Mull does stone rows, standing stones. It doesn't really do stone circles. Even this side of Argyll doesn't really do stone circles. The nearest one is kind of fairly few miles east of Auburn. So the likelihood of these being stone circles is kind of quite remote. This is what it looks like. And it's an interesting thing because it could well be a stackyard. It is closest to a township. It's in a place where you would possibly have a stackyard because it's kind of raised up, open to the air. But it doesn't match any of the stackyards on Ulva or Gometra, which are well known. They are sometimes circular on high areas. I kind of agree with Meg that it's not a stackyard, but I don't know what it is. I've gone through various types of prehistoric archaeology and I can't place it in there. The only thing that makes me there was a couple of things that make me very suspicious of this feature, is that there's another one. So this one is on the south side of Ulva. So this is kind of round the corner from where we were just looking. Picks up really well on the aerial photography. Comes up like an absolute peach. You can really see it. You're kind of like, wow. It also, I realized, got picked up by the 62 expedition, Skull expedition. They also saw it, and they also said it's a stone circle, but we don't know what it is. I didn't realize this until quite recently. So 3 separate people have all looked at these things, and we don't quite know what they are. So to give some idea of location, it's there. It's that middle dot in the middle picture. So right on the south side amongst these little kind of archipelago of islands, there's a lot of archaeology in this area. The graveyard is just to the west of this place. There's a huge amount. This is a very fertile, settled area that's been lived in for a long time. And this is what it looks like on the ground. It actually is nothing like the aerial photography. You're expecting to see something quite impressive. It's when you actually visit it, you think, okay, that's why it took such a long time to find. This one actually looks more as if it could possibly be older because the way that the stones have been covered by the turf. This one gives a more of an indication that it could be older, but is it a stone circle or a feature of some kind that kind of perhaps prehistoric? I don't know. The only thing I've got is that there is appearing on Ulva and Gometra a lot of what looks to be like Bronze Age archaeology. And the Bronze Age archaeology seems to have an association with fresh running water and view sheds out over the landscape, mostly over the seascape. And this feature is a beautiful Bronze Age cairn, which I came across walking up to the summit on New Year's Day many years ago, and I saw it way down below me. And as soon as I saw it, I knew it was something. It wasn't just a stone clearance cairn. It is sitting between the confluence of 2 little streams, and it has this view shed out over the seascape. It's quite high, and what's quite ironic is that it's about 100 yards further up this little gully from the modern viewpoint of the path that goes down to the south side. And I think it's kind of achieving the same thing. So there is this Bronze Age fascination on Ulva, I think, this isn't just the only example of it, we'll come to others. There seems to be an association with a view shed with fresh running water, but so to give some idea of location, it's the red dot on the right-hand side. So quite high up on the south side of Ulva. Going back to our stone circle, therefore, I don't spend a lot of time with these stones because I've kind of put them to one side. There's no way of knowing what these are, and I don't think I'm ever going to, I don't think I'm going to find out all that quickly. And they could well be stackyards. The reason why I go back is that this stone circle has got this. Now, this stone circle, if we're going to call it a circle, what should we call it? A stone circular feature, which I think is probably something we'd be more careful about, is right next to a significant fresh running water stream. It's going right past the feature. It also has this thing. And I'm now in very dangerous area. Because Ulva has got propped rocks. which are being intentionally propped. This is one example. I call this the elephant's foot. It's a really quite large boulder. It would have taken quite a few folk to have lifted it, and it's being propped intentionally off from underneath. This isn't the only example. There are others, and they all seem to occur in places that have got significant views or are marking areas of routeways across the landscape. So very much similar to cup and rim marking, say down in Kilmartin, which are doing the same thing. There is a possibility, and this is David Shepherd, who I think was building on the work of Tim Darville, which is that propped rocks could possibly be examples of prehistoric activity. Now, Tim goes all the way back, and he's suggesting you've got early Neolithic people who are experimenting with propping of rocks before they move on and start building portal dolmens or whatever it is. It's a I wouldn't say contentious. It's an area that you kind of navigate carefully. All I can say is that we definitely have propped rocks in significant places, and they are intentionally propped. I don't know for what age or whatever. And of course, even to this day, people prop rocks. Tourists will put stacked stones on top of another. So who knows? But the coincidence of this feature, so this thing next to that thing, next to a fresh running stream of significance that ends up in a waterfall, is it too much of a coincidence, or am I reading too much into it? So going back to our map, we're going to move out from talking about stone circles. As Alison Sheridan says, men have to be careful about talking about such things because we tend to get very fixated on very specific areas of archaeology. Is this thing. So we're moving down to the southwestern end of Ulva. This area is almost nobody walks through this area. It's on the route. There are no paths through here. It's a very remote area nowadays. Even tourists, adventurous tourists, not going to get down there. It's quite challenging to get down to. And what we're looking at is that little bay just across the water. So I'm standing, this picture's taken from Gometra, and we're looking across to that southwestern side of Ulva, and we're looking into that bay. Picked these up many years ago, and it's a selection of cairns. Now they could be stone clearance cairns, but the thing with these is that they are very big cairns. They are very well made, and there are two big ones which are both the same size, and there are two small ones which are both the same size. They're rectangular or slightly oval, and they're sitting in the middle of this. As you can see, there's agricultural ridges through here. I can't tell if they go underneath or if they abut to or whatever it is, I don't know. But they sit in the middle of this little amphitheater with this view shed out over this anchorage. And there are boat pull-ins at the bottom of this little thing, so you could get a boat up onto here. This is what they look like. Again, they're not round, so they're not prehistoric, that's for sure. Well, I'm pretty sure they're not prehistoric. From the look of the stones, I think they are 1,000 years old rather than 4,000 years old. That's the kind of feel of them. One of them has this kind of kist-like feature or kind of cutaway into it that could possibly have been something like an actual feature of it. Very hard to tell. The bracken is very thick here, so you have to do a lot of work with bracken to examine these more. And the interesting thing is when I mentioned this to the owner, he did then say to him that about 13 years ago, there was a guy living on Gometra, and the people who tend to live on Gometra, we tend to be quite interesting, independent kind of folk. This guy got himself a metal detector and without permission went metal detectoring, and he found this brooch. It was a Norse brooch, and he showed it to the owner. And then that was the last he ever saw of this guy. We know he found it at that area round the coast facing across to what I was just showing, to this these features here. It's on the other side of the water from there. And it was this feature. It wasn't this particular brooch, but it was this style of thing. And it's obviously a Norse brooch. It was found on the shoreline. So we've got evidence of Norse there. We've also got the work by Shane MacLeod, who does talk about burials having this view shed out over water, being quite a significant part of Norse funereal tradition. Are we therefore looking at something that could possibly evidence of Norse? Are these Norse burials? I don't know. They could just be piles of stone that just been very well made, but they could possibly be evidence of Norse just because of the location, the way they've been well made, and the way that they look out over this safe anchorage. So we'll move from there. So our possible Norse, maybe not, cairns. And we're going to go back to Dunban, because Ursula Betts, so this is the woman who fought the Japanese in the jungles of Borneo, I think it was, said in her work that Dunban was a Norse fort, and it went down in the local literature as a Danish fort. I don't know why. I have no idea why the interpretation of this was Norse. Mull doesn't have Norse. There was almost no excavated evidence for Norse. The only site of Norse we've got is the recent dig at Leffen, which I was on, by Dr. Claire Ellis from Argyll Archaeology, which is a community dig. So that's the only evidence for Norse we had, and that only came out like 3 or 4 years ago. So why did she interpret this as Norse? Don't know. However, Landward were with us last year, came in to do some filming. They mentioned that they'd been up to the Cave of Ibster, and when you look at the Cave of Ibster, which is in the top right-hand corner, which is this quite very difficult to reach nowadays settlement, which is now been excavated, the structures on there match very closely the structure on Dunban. And you've got DNS underneath as well, which is very similar. Now, these interpreted as kind of Pictish, Norse, whatever things. So did Ursula know something that we don't? And then we've got in Nige Harpel's recent work that's been published, which is his work on the Upper Hebrides, looking at the Viking evidence from there, where you've got structures that have got these opposing doors, which are at the end of the structures. They're not in the middle. One end is straight-sided, the other end is slightly curved or upsadal. Is that matching the features you're getting on Gometra and Ulva, this kind of area of Ambrou? Are these actually Norse settlement sites, which is why you've got this one plonked in the middle of an earlier Iron Age gallery done or whatever? They're reusing sites that were defendable, because Gometra and Ulva are sitting out into the waterways. They are more susceptible, I think, to Viking incursions. I think Mull was probably too much of a difficult undertaking, and maybe Ulva and Gometra were easier to invade, or whatever it is. There is an assumption here that the reason why we don't find Viking is because they hybridized in. I think that's just because we haven't been looking, we haven't found the evidence. We have other evidence of the same kind of structures. So this is actually a ways from that Ambrou area. This is actually in front of my house in Gometra. We have another dun, and this is Duneffen. which is an area of actual amazing area of what looks like be Bronze Age activity, completely unrecorded, but we won't go there now. So this is this feature. And on top of it, we have got evidence of fortifications, but on this picture, it's going to be at the right end of the picture. You've got similar structure, harder to see in this particular picture. It picks up better in others. Is similar structure. So a straight-sided with on one end, which is the left-hand end, and a slightly apsidal or curved end of the other, with the suggestion of opposing doorways at the left end of the structure. So again, the same as what you're seeing on Dunban. And again, is this another evidence of a possible Norse settlement? Because we do have, I'm going to go quickly through this, we do have other examples on Ulva of houses that seem to match that tradition, but sitting in townships. So this is Old Cove. Old Cove is interesting because we have an estate map from 1812. Now we have established ruins. There are extensive ruins go Old Cove. We can see them, but this is not listed on that map. It's not included on the map. So it's been abandoned before 1812. There are houses in here which have got curved ends and straight ends. And I'm not saying this is a Norse settlement, but I'm thinking maybe we've got a tradition that's come through into the township period, and it gets into these old townships. But the townships we are seeing around us are a bit younger than that. They're kind of like early 19th century, maybe late 18th century. Whereas this township, which is one of Galley's, is an Aninius settlement, which is, he suggests these early townships are the ones you find up the kind of the valleys up towards the high ground. This is exactly what Old Cove does, he suggests that these are the older type of townships. So are you looking at a tradition that's come out of the Norse and propagated into some of the earlier townships? Maybe. Okay, going back to the map. So we're going back to Ambrew, and then we are going slightly above Balacloich, which is, we're moving away to go to a different area. So this is quite an established area of, this is on a kind of level terrace. And you've got these quite substantial earthworks of a whole mass of higgledy-piggledy of structures or features sitting in the landscape away from the township. So this is not part of the township. The township is down below this. This is up above. My experience here is that this tends to be more Iron Agey, early medieval, and the later townships tend to be down or further into the shelf. People seem to light themselves up in the wind, maybe for keeping the midges off, or who knows. But that seems to be a tradition around here. And the arrow, interestingly enough, just out of pure interest, is a Mesolithic shell midden, which is just sitting across the other side from this feature, which is something that Edinburgh University are very interested in. This is an open air shell midden, so we've only just begun to explore it. So this is kind of completely unknown. So it's sitting in the 10-meter line, which is the old coastline. So we're going to go back to this one in August. But anyway, going back to this feature, the one in the foreground, this is a drone of it. It's kind of doesn't pick well up on the drone. Didn't get that kind of sunlight on it. This feature marked in red is quite interesting. Doesn't pick up well on the drone, but it's circular. It looks like a roundhouse. I'm going to go to this. So this gives you some semblance with the shadows of what it looks like. It's quite a higgledy-piggledy area of things. My instinct is this is probably early medieval, and a bit like the Pitcarmick buildings, maybe you're seeing a transition from circular structures to rectangular structures, all within the same settlement. You know, they're maybe even reusing circular structures from the previous Iron Age and having rectangular structures. So maybe this is what this is. This is a kind of a transitioning through of structures, which you do find elsewhere. We have another one. So this is a bit further up, same terrace. So this terrace is kind of flat, and a bit further up, you have the same thing. So about 100 meters away, you've got exactly the same thing happening. This kind of collection of buildings creating a kind of cut-off area of the terrace, kind of that's our bit, that's your bit. So maybe this is an established Iron Age kind of medieval, and then right up on top. So these two dots that just appeared, maybe we have here, if we go to it, these two areas of high ground, which are not very high, but they're cultivated areas. They're on hilltops. Lots of turfed dikes going on in here. Lots of weird walls, a bit like Dragon Tooth that Akfa found and recorded on Heinisch and Tyree. A lot of sense of age in this, and a lot of features that, for me, if my instinct says possibly Neolithic farmers opening up a landscape right at, so clearing the tops of trees, the easier bits, and creating small enclosures within that. Something that backs, so this is the wall, something that backs that up is on the right-hand side. This feature here, which is possibly, I think it's a kist burial, a large kist burial. Edinburgh looked at it and think it could possibly be a chambered cairn. It's sitting buried in the turf dike. So the dike's being kind of built, and then this thing is being plonked in it. It's been robbed out. I think that's the capstone, which is slightly down the slope from it. It has yet to be properly worked. This is my 3D of it. It's definitely there's a chamber in it. What the chamber is hard to work because it's been quite heavily robbed out. My instinct is it's Bronze Age, more likely than Neolithic, but Edinburgh seem to think more Neolithic-y than Bronze Age. I don't know. But we have got this, which is on the right-hand side. These are known standing stones. Well, actually, the ones on the right-hand side are all the same stone. The black and white picture is the stone when it was known as the recumbent. And then in the mid-80s, the landowner came and put it up right again. But we do have this stone sitting within that landscape that does, to me, resemble possibly a recumbent that's been fallen. So a standing stone that's fallen over. The location is interesting. It could be. And then we're back to the map, and we are. So that was going to be where I was kind of an overall picture of that area of the landscape. That was where my focus was until earlier this year, when we had. I thought most of the kind of the main archaeology was down in that area. That was going to be my focus. Akfa had been, and they had surveyed in February. This is Akfa working in quite wet conditions, doing sheelings. An amazing to survey that eastern side of Ulva in quite chilly conditions. I certainly got worn out trying to follow them around through the bushes. And because this is the populated end of Ulva, it's more the area that's being, agriculture has been more heavily impacted on the environment. There is stuff in there, but it's not the same as ilk as down the other end. So I wasn't kind of really focused on that. But then when St. Andrews came to help us with some dendrochronology from St. Andrews University. And as part of this project, this was to date the age of the woodland that's on this eastern side of Ulva, which is quite an unusual, mature, broadleaf woodland. With them came Gordon Gray-Stevens, whose partner is Sharon Webb from Kilmartin Museum. the past director, now curator. Of course, her fascination and her expertise is in rock art. We do have things that look like cut marks. I have recorded quite a lot of them, but I don't have experience enough to be able to determine what is and what isn't. And she did find what she thinks, she absolutely certain is that we do have rock art on Ulva, which would be a first for Mull in general. Sharon has found quite significant amounts of rock art. The only issue we've got, she said, which is very unusual, is that our rock art doesn't come with the ring around the rock art. We have natural cut marks here. It's part of our geology. So trying to work out what is natural and what is human-made is really difficult, but obviously Sharon's a bit of an expert. She has come across quite significant panels that she wants to come back and survey. So this one needs to be clean, the one in the main picture. The one on the right-hand side is a stepping stone. So it's probably part of a panel got moved. And this is the end of my talk. So this is Sharon being very excited, sitting on a rock panel that has yet to be cleaned. So when I thought I could leave the east side alone for a bit, it looks like it's going to suck me back into being a bit more focused again on the east side. And that's the end.